Good morning and welcome to Live with Lewis for September 9th, 2004. We're coming to you today live from the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation, which is about, I guess we're about 45 miles west of the Missouri River right now and about an hour and a half, 2 hours northwest of Pierre, South Dakota. Now, we're a little bit off trail and a little bit out of chronology this morning, but we're happy to be joining the Core 2 10 of Many Voices project as they move across the country in a similar fashion to what we're doing, bringing the story of Lewis and Clark and the Native voices to life as they move across the country. And as I mentioned, we're in Eagle Butte, the town, the community of Eagle Butte in Eagle Butte, South Dakota on the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation. Once again, my name is Scott Mandrell, portraying Meriwether Lewis for the Discovery Expedition, and we're happy that you've joined us today for this special broadcast from Eagle Butte. We want to remind our viewing audience today that, as always, they can send us emails throughout the show at Lewis and Clark, that's LEWISANDCLARK, spelled out, Lewis and Clark, at Clayton, Clayton.K12.mo.us. That's Lewis and Clark at Clayton.K12.mo.us. We look forward to your email questions or comments as we go through today's show, and we'll address those questions and comments as we get to them during the program. And if we don't have time to do so, we'll certainly try to answer any questions you may have via email at some very immediate date following the broadcast. So thanks again for joining us. We've got a pretty exciting show today. We're happy to be here. We've got some great guests, and we're going to be able to once again tell the story of the Sioux Nation, and we continue to move through the traditional homeland of the Sioux Empire and the Sioux people, and so that's going to be an exciting part of the show today. We want to start by talking a little bit about what's happened the last week. As we do each week, we'll talk about what's happened historically with regard to the Lewis and Clark expedition 200 years ago, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's happened to the Discovery expedition as we retrace that voyage across the interior of the nation. 200 years ago, and if you remember the last time we saw you, we were broadcasting to you, we were broadcasting to you from Springfield, South Dakota, and we had actually been moving around the Springfield area between Gavin's Point and Randall Dam, spending a great deal of time on the Yankton Sioux Reservation near Marty in Greenwood, South Dakota. And you may remember that at that point we had a council with the Yankton Sioux, and which had happened 200 years ago, of course, as well as having a very contemporary meeting with them as well. And many of you may have seen the footage of the Black Hawk helicopter that we brought in there, and the young people were very excited to have the opportunity to see those kind of things, and we brought the boats past there as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, but it's important that we take a look back at what happened 200 years ago as the Corps made their way by this area. You may remember that we were at what was called Calumet Bluffs, and at the Calumet Bluff, the Eagle Bluffs, there by what is now Yankton, South Dakota, and the Gavin's Point Dam, Lewis and Clark encountered the Yankton Sioux, the Yankton, and they had a very positive experience there with them, including what many of you may have heard about, the story of Struck by the Ree. We talked a little bit about that, and the time that they spent, several days actually, as they moved through that area with the Yankton Sioux. The Yankton Sioux had a very good council with them, and they moved through that area. And Lewis and Clark were actually well pleased with that meeting. They had been warned and sort of prejudiced, as it were, by what would happen when they met the Sioux, based upon some comments and reports that had been given to them by French traders and others that had made their way up the Missouri River. And even Thomas Jefferson had impressed upon Lewis the importance of good relations with the Sioux Nation as they moved through. Now, beyond the actual meeting with the Sioux Nation, they encountered a host of other things that were of particular note to those of us who follow the journals. Not the least of which was on the 7th, just a couple of days ago, they ran into a very strange land formation and a unique community, as it were. And what is now just below Randall Dam in South Dakota, not too awfully far from the community of Platte, South Dakota, in that area there, Pickstown. Lewis and Clark on the south side of the river noticed a hill that was particularly prominent. Now, in this part of the country, there are a lot of untreed hills that have no trees on them, that are large mound-shaped trees. But this one hill stood out. It was particularly high. It was a high elevation, and of course this was a military expedition that always took time to note high elevations because of their strategic importance. And so the men made a hike to what is now known as Old Baldy, and what they refer to as Old Baldy. And in addition to that land formation, they also ran into their first village of prairie dogs. And you might remember the great story about Lewis and Clark and the men spending the day carrying buckets of water from the river up to this prairie dog village and trying to flood the prairie dogs out of their holes so that they could capture one. And indeed they did. They did capture a prairie dog there, and Lewis was extremely interested in this animal, which again was new to European science, and so he took meticulous studies of that animal and recorded that animal for the first time for European sciences. And so that was an exciting stop, as well as probably somewhat of a humorous stop for the original expedition, if you can imagine the men who had encountered all of these terrible hardships and all, and then they get to this place where they actually spend the day chasing this little animal around the hillside. So it must have been a curious day for them, and it was a curious day for us as well as we came by, and several of our men, of course, as we try to do at each of these important stops, made their way up there. So other than the meeting with the Yankton Sioux, which was of tremendous importance, and this incident with the prairie dogs, it was a relatively uneventful week for the expedition. Again, just trudging up the river through what is now beautiful countryside, and quite stunning when you see it if you have not, and we're going to be showing you footage of the countryside around here as well. Now, the Discovery Expedition, of course, retracing that voyage, has adventures of our own. And as you remember, we were at Springfield, South Dakota, when we saw you last, and we had to make our way from Springfield up to Pickstown and the Fort Randall Dam. En route, of course, we chose to stop and meet our new friends and relatives at the Marty and Greenwood area around the Yankton Reservation, and we had an excellent time there, and it was a real treat to be able to bring the boats there. However, I will tell you that we had been warned for years, actually, as we prepared for this Bicentennial, that would be a very difficult stretch of the river. The river now is very different than it was, and we'll talk more about that in weeks to come, and even today yet. But because of the placement of the dams that have been there for about 50, 60 years now, about 50 years, I guess, there have been tremendous changes in the river, tremendous amount of sediment deposits and that sort of thing. And the river there is very, very shallow, and there was great speculation that we would be unable to take the large boat, the keel boat, through that area. But indeed we did. We're going to show you a little footage of what's happened the last week, and hopefully it'll shed a little light on what's going on with the Discovery Expedition as we make our voyage across America today. So we're going to start here at the mouth of the Niobrara. The Niobrara figures prominently into this story about what's happened to the river over the last 50 years or so. And here we are at actually something that's anomalous and anachronistic to this story, and this is the Mormon Memorial at Mormon Canal near the Niobrara, just above the Niobrara, on the south side of the river, near the Ponca Agency and just above the Santee Sioux Reservation. And the Mormon Creek was, and this particular site in this monument is actually erected in honor of many of the Mormons who were en route from Nauvoo, Illinois to what would ultimately become their new home in Salt Lake. And here we are spending time with the Ponca from Oklahoma, who return each year to have their powwow on their traditional homeland, which is just near the Niobrara River, just several miles up the Niobrara River. And if you read the journals, you know that Clark made the 4-mile trek up the river to examine and study this area a little bit more. And as he did, he actually saw the remnants of this Ponca village. And so we were honored to be invited to this powwow and to join in the grand entry as we shared our stories with the Ponca people and heard theirs as well. And the Ponca now live in Oklahoma, and although many of them actually, there are a number who have returned to the area, and in just a minute you're going to see a bridge. In a few months we'll talk about that. Here we are at Niobrara State Park, just above the mouth, and it's quite a beautiful and stunning view of the river. Here we are moving down the river through this area near Niobrara, and you can see all of this marshland has been formed by the changes with the dam, and I'm going to talk about that actually in some of the video in a moment, but I mentioned some of the Ponca moving back. Standing Bear, and you'll see a bridge that's actually dedicated to him, but Standing Bear, who was the chief of the Ponca, after their removal to Oklahoma, decided that he wanted to bring people back, and indeed did, and actually reestablished an agency in this area in the late 19th century. Here you see us moving through this extremely shallow water And there are some of the men. There's Jay Rotkin on the bow of the red boat, actually testing with the only true depth finder we use, and that is a pole, because it never lies to us. There you see us flying the Ponca flag as we make our way past these quite beautiful areas of the Missouri River. And again, that flag presented to us by the Ponca.
Traveling between Springfield, South Dakota, and Niagara, Nebraska, actually on our way to Greenwood, South Dakota, where the Yankton Sioux live. The area we're passing through here is between Fort Randall Dam and the Gavins Point Dam. One of the interesting things about the river here is how much it's changed in the last 50 years. If you notice here behind us, there are these marsh-like areas. Those were all caused by a tremendous amount of sediment being deposited here just since the dams have been put in place, and the natural flush and flow of the Missouri River, flushing the delta from the mouth of the Niobrara River, has gone away because of the dam stemming that flow, causing all of this new formation of land here in this area. And we're going to talk more about that over the next few weeks as we talk about the changing river.
And indeed, we will talk about that a great deal more. And here you are. This is Standing Bear Bridge, right near the town of Niobrara, and on the north side, running water. As I mentioned, we'll be talking more about that. But it's important to understand that this area that you see now with all those marshes is much more like what the Missouri River looked like down in Iowa and in Missouri 200 years ago. This portion of the river was actually quite free-flowing when Lewis and Clark came by. And here we are once again making our way up in the shoal water, and we're about to get into trouble here. The high winds are coming up about this time, and you'll see here in just a moment the boats actually get pushed into the shoal water, and you can see how shoal it is, how shallow, and those are the large Pelican Islands there. And Jim Sturm, our cameraman, decided to spend the day with us on board, and he's getting some good footage of the Pelican Islands as we move through these areas that are just dotted with sandbars and shifting sands under just a couple of feet of water. And the boats got stuck, and you see us actually in the water cordelling. This was another one of our very real experiences along the way. And once underway again, we moved up, and the day became quite beautiful. The wind remained high. We did have some major storms yet that afternoon, and actually this evening. And there you see the Yankton flag flying on the red pirogue, as well as we continue to fly the flags of the sovereign nations as we move across the waterways and through the traditional homelands and sovereign nations of the First Nations, American natives. Here we are docking the boat actually on Monday. That was Sunday you saw us before. Here we are finally docking the boat on Monday morning at Greenwood on the Yankton Reservation. And then several of the men made their way up into Wagner for the Labor Day Parade. Wagner is a community within the confines of the Yankton Reservation also. So it's and this was quite a large parade. We were surprised, and a small number of us left the boat, and there you see us marching in that Labor Day Parade, which was all themed Lewis and Clark for the year, with this being the Bicentennial commemoration year as well. So again, it's been an exciting year, and these folks were very kind to us here and fed us a lot of Indian tacos after the parade, and we had an excellent time in Wagner. So it's been an exciting week for us, and I'm not so sure it hasn't been maybe a little bit more exciting for us than it was for the original Corps with some of the adventures we've had this week. And as I mentioned, this week we also sent some men up to chase some prairie dogs. They were unsuccessful, however. We do hope to maybe later this year actually bring you some good footage of prairie dogs and that sort of thing. And as well, we've portaged the boats, and they're above Fort Randall now at North Point, moving to Whetstone Bay today. So that's where the Discovery Expedition is 200 years later, following the footsteps of our predecessors, the men of the Corps of Discovery 200 years ago. So again, we remind you to send your questions and comments to us at lewisandclark@clayton.k12.mo.us, and we look forward to those throughout today's broadcast. As I mentioned, we have an exciting show today, and we're going to start by bringing in our first guest today. Our first guest is Raymond Uses the Knife Jr., and we're pleased to have him. He is the vice chairman of the Cheyenne River Sioux Nation and here at the reservation. And I just want to, first of all, welcome you and thank you for taking the time to join us today, Raymond.
It's a pleasure to be here, Scott.
Thanks very much. And I know we talked a little bit beforehand, and we're gonna ask you some specific questions today to get our viewers up to speed a little bit about where we are and the people who live here in this community and the history of this community and all. But I just wanted to ask a little bit, first of all, about you. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been the vice chairman of the tribe?
I've been the vice chairman of the tribe now for 2 years. I've been on the tribal council for 14 years, going on 15 years. So I've been elected back in 1990 and been serving the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe and its members for these many years, and it's been enjoyable. Sometimes it was hard work, a lot of hard work, but it was rewarding as well.
Well, I can tell you, it's beautiful here, and I always try to tell people about the beauty of South Dakota. I've had the pleasure of coming to South Dakota for many years now for different things, and I'm always struck by the beauty of the landscape here, and this was actually my first time to Eagle Butte, and it's really quite beautiful to drive up here.
Yeah, South Dakota is a very nice place to visit. If you ever visited South Dakota, I'm sure you've gone home with a lot of memories, and those that are here are the Lakota Nation. We welcome you, and we have this huge state of South Dakota. We have several bands of the Lakota, Sichanru, Oglala, Unkpapcha, Minikoju, Itazipcho, Sihasapa, and Ohenupa. All of our the 7 council fires of the Titruan Lakota Oyate. We welcome you here, and we strive today to maintain our culture and our Lakota way of life, and welcome.
No, Pilama. Thank you very much. I've got to remember when I'm on this side of the river, it's Pilama. Pilama. On the other side of the river is Pidama. And we're going to hopefully try to educate our audience as well to some of the language issues that, in fact, that's a good place for us to start a little bit. Let's talk about the difference because we spent time with the Yankton who are Dakota, and now we've moved into the area of the Lakota. So could you tell us a little bit about the derivations there?
Yeah, we have 3 dialects of the Titruan-Oyate: Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. And I'd say the majority of us that are in the Titruan-Oyate are Lakota. And so I can very well understand someone who is speaking with an N dialect or a D dialect. It's the same Lakota word, just with a different dialect. And this is very interesting because many times our visitors come here, and perhaps we Lakota visit them, and we speak the language, and we can understand each other very well. And these 3 dialects are representative of the Titruan-Oyate, and I hope that our language is preserved, and we have taken many steps towards this goal, is to preserve our language and our culture. We at the Shinover Sioux Tribe implemented an ordinance to, we call it the Lakota Language and Cultural Preservation Ordinance, and it's become tribal law, and now all the students who are attending Department of Interior funded schools, they have to have at least 1 hour of Lakota language instruction and curriculum. So we're proud of this.
Absolutely, that's excellent. And I can tell you that one of the things, it's taken me a while to get my ear tuned to it, but it's a beautiful language, and truly. Okay. And we are. That's one of the things that I think is, in fact, that's a good opportunity to talk about a little bit. We try to keep Lewis and Clark tied into this a little bit, and while we want to talk about very contemporary things about the tribe and the history of the tribe, that very thing I think it's important that we touch on, because we're getting ready to come up to the period near Pier where we talk about probably the one moment in the expedition when the expedition maybe almost came to an end, and then for a long time that's been characterized as a confrontation with the Sioux, and really as it's been explained to me by my Sioux friends is that the tradition has often been that was known as the Great Misunderstanding, and that communication and the lack of understanding on the part of interpreters played a large part in what happened there that day.
Of course, the interpreters play a big part in the communication between 2 cultures, and the interpreters have to be very knowledgeable in both languages to be able to convey the message that needs to be sent across the culture, and sometimes history holds that these interpreters were not as astute as first thought, and also some of them had their own self-motives in their positions, and this played for a lot of problems between the 2 cultures, I believe. Yeah.
Well, we're going to try to do better this time around, huh? Well, I'll tell you, some of the questions we'd like to give our viewers a sense of is, first of all, it's 1804, and Lewis and Clark are making their way up the river. When did they enter the Sioux Nation, the Sioux Empire, what constituted the Sioux Empire, and in 1804, what did the Sioux consider their empire in terms of land and their vast scope of influence?
In my ancestors' time, all of the land belonged to the native people, and the Sioux territory was considered by those who have encroached this area, our neighboring tribes, and of course the white culture have realized that the Sioux have controlled a lot of the territory in this, and I understand that this territory included parts of Canada all the way down into the basins of the just north of Texas and Oklahoma. So this was a vast area that the Titron Oyate had control over, and I also want to point out that Sioux is a derogatory term of our Oyate, our people. So we'd like to refer to ourselves as Titron Oyate, and also in my reservation we consider ourselves Lakota. Yeah.
So the Titron Oyate today, what is the territory today?
Today, unfortunately, because of the theft of our lands over the years, now we're down to just a few million acres in the state of South Dakota. The Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, I believe, we are somewhat little over 1 million acres, and we're at one time confined to this area. We couldn't leave without permission, and so we have this area that we control today. So as you can see, our lands have dwindled to a very few acres, and which made it very hard for our ancestors to survive with the lack of venison, buffalo, and unable to fish and provide food for our families. It was very difficult for us, and we had no choice but to protect our way of life in this little piece, these islands that they put us on. Yeah.
Well, and as you talk about issues like hunting, and the Lakota were a hunting people. I mean, that was obviously very much a part of the lifestyle, and the organization of the tribe, I guess, revolved largely around the buffalo and the migration of the buffalo. So these vast lands were absolutely crucial and to that existence. Let's talk a little bit about the tribes in terms of structure. 200 years ago, Lewis and Clark arrived. You're the vice chairman of the tribe today. When Lewis and Clark arrived 200 years ago, what was the structure of the tribe 200 years ago?
I believe that our Lakota Oyate, we had our own leadership, and to become a leader of the nation, you have to present yourself in a worthy manner, befitting the nation. And the Nacha is what we call today in the contemporary world, they say chief, but in those days we had the Nacha, the leaders of the nation. And from there, the many societies that were there to protect the people, the Oyate, and they were also organized so as to be able to hunt and gather food, and also to protect the villages as we traveled across the prairie. And many times the weather had a big factor in where we were at certain times of the year. And the Black Hills, the Chesapa, were very important to our people because of the serenity and also the spirituality, and also the shelter that it brought to our nations. We were able to live there through the winter months after we gathered our food from the buffalo, our main diet, and also some of our food grew on trees and shrubs. So we were able to survive in this way, and plenty of deer and prairie chickens and some smaller animals that we ate at the time, and a lot of our shelter came from these larger animals like the buffalo.
Well, certainly the Lewis and Clark even record the fact that they feel like they've entered a paradise, a Garden of Eden of sorts. In their journals, they talk about those kind of things, and indeed, it was. Creator provided everything that was necessary for Tetuan Oate. And so we appreciate that, and I guess one of the questions that we're interested in is based upon Lewis and Clark made some recordings of the numbers of people that they encountered, and they made estimations of the population. Do you have any sense of what the population was at that time, and if you can speak to that just a little bit, but also if you would talk a little bit about the Tetuan Oate today in terms of population?
I think the numbers at the time, of course, were in the millions. However,
go ahead. Yeah.
However, good. I gave my own microphone. At the time of this 200 years ago, the population of the Tetuan Oate was in millions, and not only this, but there were over 10,000 languages in the United States. In pre-Columbus time. So as the years, the centuries progressed, a lot of the languages were lost because of the loss of the tribes and their very existence, because of the many diseases and the troubles that our ancestors had. But I always feel that the language is our connection to our existence. So if the languages are gone, then our existence is also impaired.
And there's been an effort to record the language, and it's available. I know someone who's interested can actually get a hold of a dictionary. I have a copy of every Lakota, and so it's something that I hope that we would encourage teachers and students who have an interest to actually to pursue this and seek out books, and there are books that record phonetically the spelling of many of the Lakota vocabulary and syntax and things like that. As far as where the tribe is today, we've talked a lot about where they were when Lewis and Clark found them. They were living here. They were hunting buffalo. They had a relatively idyllic life. And indeed, the Sioux controlled the Middle Plains. I mean, this was a vast empire, and we talk about that on many times. While there were many other tribes that we've spoken with and whose history and cultures we have shared with people via this internet medium, it's important that people really understand that even Jefferson, prior to the expedition, was aware of the vast influence of the Sioux tribe in this empire. So, at any rate, I'm sorry. Okay. We need to use this mic again. I'm sorry. But at any rate, if you could talk a little bit about that in terms of the role that the Sioux played on the greater, within the native world, in terms of being this major, they were a superpower. The Sioux were the superpower of North America, essentially, when Lewis and Clark arrived here. And then today, obviously, there are economic and social differences in today. And where is the tribe today in terms of its economics and some of the contemporary issues like that are the lifeblood of the tribe today?
First of all, I wanted to welcome all the students that are out here in the crowd. It makes me very proud that they're of their interest, and I thank their teachers for bringing them. This is
you all can applaud your teachers once in a while. I'm a teacher. I like to hear that when your teachers got you out here.
Yeah. It's really a good crowd to see out there, all the smiling faces and the young people, and I appreciate their interest. The Sioux, the Lakota, Oate, we have played a big part in the history of this whole nation, and our agility as warriors, I believe, played a big part. And the main thing that I wanted to mention is that our spirituality as a Lakota nation is many times overlooked. Although we had the strength in numbers, we also had the agility of our warriors, the ability to fight the enemies, and also to preserve our way of life. But we also had a very important part of our spirituality. We have what we call the Wakanthanka, who is the creator, who we believe is our protector in our lives. And many times the history holds that we had no connection to the spirit world, which is very false, which is very untrue. We were connected to our Creator from infancy all the way till we pass on. In fact, a lot. Excuse me.
My apologies. We'll dock him for that.
I had to clear my throat. But I believe that our Creator protects us all, and I believe that also Lewis and Clark's expedition perhaps was protected by the Creator in their path through this territory. And so our spirituality is our base, and it's our way of life. We have everything that from infancy to our passing, all of our language is based on spirituality. So that's very important to us.
Absolutely, and thank you for sharing that. I would like very quickly, because we've got another guest today we want to spend a minute with and all, but tell us a little bit about the tribe today. What is here at Eagle Butte and around this reservation, and even if you want to speak to a little wider, to the wider Lakota world or all the, where is the tribe today? How are things doing for the tribe today?
Well, historically, since we were put on these reservations, the Howard Wheeler Act of 1933 and 34 allowed each reservation to adopt their own constitution. So today we operate under a charter and also the bylaws. And we use this as a guide, a tool to help organize and protect our way of life and also our lands. The Makoche is the land. And the Sioux Nation and the Titwa Oyate today is broken into reservations across the state of South Dakota. The Cheyenne River Indian Reservation, we are 14,000, now fast approaching 15,000 strong. And our language is still here in our culture. And we are considered to be one of the forefront leaders of other nations in this area because of our ability to, and I believe it's all because of knowledge, and also unity is very important. Without unity, we can never progress. So I hope that the young people out here are listening to this, because our future is very much dependent on you as the young people. The unity can never happen unless you can face your neighbor and shake his hand and help your neighbor. So without this, we might as well throw in the towel and be assimilated into the white man's world. And sometimes we have to exist in the white man's world, but we also should protect our way of life and our existence and our languages. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raymond. I appreciate so much you taking the time, and I hope that you can stick around for a little while, because we hope to have some questions for you. Let's all thank Raymond Uses the Knife Jr. for being here. Thank you very much, and please feel free to stick around. Don't leave just yet. Thanks again, and we do appreciate it. He's got a lot of things to do here on the reservation with his responsibilities as the vice chairman, and we know that it was a great sacrifice for him to come here today. So Pilama, we thank you. And now we're going to have an opportunity to speak with a very special guest and a very special member of the tribe, with Elsie Slidesoff. Elsie, how are you doing? Nice to meet you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming. You told me earlier that you live here in the area now, but you used to live some 40 miles away from Eagle Butte. Is that right?
Yes.
So how often did you used to get to town?
Oh, maybe once a month.
About once a month?
Mm-hmm.
So as from a convenience perspective, I guess it's a little better being in town now, maybe, huh?
Yes.
Well, one of the reasons we were happy to have you today is that one of the things that we wanted to talk about was the history of the tribe, not just from Lewis and Clark's perspective or 200 years ago, but a perspective from a personal perspective. And you and I spoke a little bit earlier, and we talked a little bit about your life here, and you mentioned that you've lived all your life here at Cheyenne. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about what life was like for you here on the reservation when you were a young woman?
I was born in 1921, and at that time things were different. There were more Indian people living on the reservation, more elderly, and they really lived their way of life, Indian life, then it was today. Things were a lot different then. They dress different, they eat differently, well, the meals are different, and everything that they make and use is like with leather and beadwork, and that's the way they wear their costumes, and women folks wear long dresses and that, but that was the way of life. They never wear short dresses, but that's a big change now. And I think that those should be brought back.
So you think things have gotten a little loose, huh?
Yes.
You sound like my grandmother.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it doesn't seem right to dress the way they are now, because it's not the way that we were taught in the early days to be, out of respect. We're supposed to watch ourselves, the way we dress. We don't show off legs. We don't just dress anyway, but we dress accordingly to the way that they live and they like, not the way we do.
Okay, so things have certainly changed socially on the reservation as much as they have even in the wider world, I guess.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you, we spoke a little bit earlier about the fact that, and one of the things that we want to talk about, we're going to talk about a great deal over the next few months and years even, is about the phenomena of the boarding schools and the number of Native Americans who were sent to boarding schools. And I asked you earlier, and that's a whole topic unto itself, but I asked you earlier, and I think a lot of our viewers don't understand how many young Native American children were sent to boarding schools and what that experience was like in the Native community. How old were you when you were sent to boarding school?
I was 7 years old. And
7?
yes, we had to be in the boarding school because our parents did not have a job, no way of getting our income. So we were sent to the boarding school so we can have our meals and clothes given to us by the government, and we don't need to buy our clothes like when we were at home.
How often did you see when you went to boarding school, how often did you see your parents?
Well, for 9 months maybe we don't see our parents. We were not allowed to go home on weekends. We stayed in dorms all through the school year. Sometimes later on in the years we were eligible to go home for Christmas vacation. But that's just once a year that during the December that we get to go home.
Did you speak Lakota when you were there?
Yes, that's the only language I knew, but we all had to change. We were forced to stop talking Indian. We were punished when we was talking Indian. We had to kneel out in the hallways for hours, and when we don't, we get more punished. Some are even kept from eating, and or restrictions put on us. So that's what we had to do, and we couldn't talk our language like we want to.
When you talk, can you tell us the school you went to? What school were you sent to?
I was sent to Shine Agency boarding school.
And where is that, or where was that?
I think it's about 60 miles from here towards the east.
About 60 miles to the east
That
from here?
used to be the old Shine Agency.
And was that a government school? Was that run by the government?
That was a government school, boarding school.
And how long did your children also go to boarding school?
Yes, they did. They were treated the same way.
So the experience didn't really change for them.
No, not really. But that's when we lost our Lakota language. All the kids lost our language, so nowadays they don't talk the Lakota language. They all talk English, and just a few of us keep our language.
We don't have a tremendous amount of time. We do appreciate you being here. We want to talk to you more afterwards, maybe today. But while we have you here, I just would like you to say your piece, if you would. And you've got an opportunity here. All these young people from here at Eagle Butte are in the audience today, and there's a lot of young people watching you on the internet today as we talk, and that are going to hear this message in the future. And what message do you have to share, not only with the Lakota youth, but with the young people of America who are watching you today?
Yes, I would like to see the schools teach more about histories from our own areas, because these kids need to know their history. Like now, we don't know nothing about Lewis and Clark, and they ask us questions, what can we tell them, because we never hear about her. There's that woman that they're talking about. And I myself heard very little of it when I heard about it when my grandparents were alive, but they didn't know too much either. So that's what we should do, is teach our kids more of our histories, and on reservation especially, so the kids will know their homeland and their history. My grandfather, I have a grandfather named Crazy Horse, and he was born around early 1800s, and I haven't heard, but this woman that they're talking about must be about that age too. And I was wondering, if that was at the same time that this trip was made along the Missouri River when my grandfather was alive. He was a well-noted man from our reservation, and he was killed by some men in Nebraska, and to this day you hear about him. They made a statue of him in Hot Springs or someplace around Black Hills. And recently we were able to say that we are related to him. We proved that I am related to him. He's my grandfather, and happened to be the first one on the list. So I'm this oldest granddaughter living, and just recently that was put through court, and we finally came to prove that we are related to him, and I'm proud of that.
Well, very good, and that's another example of knowledge and learning history and learning one's own history, which is a big part of what this is all about. This Bicentennial commemoration is learning not only about the history of Lewis and Clark, but learning about our individual histories, learning about the history of our communities, of our tribes, of our states, of our nation, with the hope that as we all move forward, that we move forward together, and that this nation becomes stronger for all of our peoples and all of our histories together. So we're going to have to, we're getting close on time. I think we may have time. Jim, do we have time for a couple of questions before we go? Yeah. In fact, what I'd like to do is take a couple of questions from the audience, since we're lucky enough to have a live audience here today. Elsie, can you stick around for just a moment?
Yes.
Okay, very good. We're going to ask some of our young people in the audience today. Oh, I just got my head cut off. If we could have any questions there. Does anyone in the audience have any questions today about either the Lewis and Clark expedition, or maybe a question for your vice chairman of your tribe here at the Cheyenne River or for Elsie, who is one of your own elders and oral historians for your tribe. Are there any questions out there? Please raise your hand if you have a question. Does anyone have a question? Yes, young man. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question, and I'll repeat it for you. Oh, here you go. Nice and loud. Speak loudly. Okay, the question was, where's Sacagawea from? She was actually from out near the Lemhi Pass, out in what is now Salmon, Idaho, in the Lemhi Valley. She was Shoshone, and she was actually kidnapped by the Minotari or the Hidatsa-Mandan and brought back, and that's where she joined the expedition in North Dakota. But she was actually from what is today the Montana-Idaho area. Okay? Any other questions? Yes, young man. Go ahead, stand up and ask your question. Nice, good, strong voice. Let me hear you. When were Lewis and Clark born? Meriwether Lewis was born August 18th of 1774, and William Clark was born August 1st of 1770. Any other questions? When was she captured? Yeah. Is that what your question? The question was, when was Sacagawea captured? She was captured, we believe, probably about the year either 1800 or 1802, about 2 years or so prior to probably Lewis and Clark finding her. She was quite young, somewhere between the age of 13 and 15 or something like that, maybe even a little younger. She was probably about 15 or so when Lewis and Clark met her, 15 or 16. So she was very young, and it was at the turn of the 19th century. So just a couple of years before Lewis and Clark met her. Other questions over here? Very good. Good questions. Did you have a question, young man? Do you have a question?
Where were they born and buried?
Where were they born and buried? Well, Lewis was born, they were both born in Virginia. Lewis was born at Ivy, Virginia. And Lewis is buried on the Natchez Trace in Tennessee, and William Clark is buried in St. Louis, Missouri at Bellefontaine Cemetery, or Bellefountain Cemetery. Yes, young man, what's your question?
Where was Sacagawea buried?
Where was she buried? That's a tricky question. There are some of the best scholars in the country are still scratching their heads about that one. There's some confusion because they're not quite sure. There's a little bit of an argument about where she's buried, so I don't want to answer that definitively. I'll leave that to some armchair scholars who are in their college offices right now poring over documents. Where were they from? They were both born in Virginia, and they ultimately moved. Lewis lived in Virginia and then spent a lot of time in the Army, and Clark was in what is now the Falls of the Ohio area around Clarksville, Indiana, and Louisville, Kentucky when Lewis met him. Other questions, young lady?
When did Sacagawea have her baby?
When did she have her baby? Her baby was born over the winter just prior to the expedition's departure, born in February of 1805, and just before they departed Mandan in April. So the baby was quite young when they got underway. Does anyone have a question? And these are good questions. Does anyone have a question for either of our guests that are here today? Does anyone have a question for one of our guests that are here today? Yes, young man. Actually, I tell you what, you asked a question before, so I'm going to ask this fellow right here for his question.
How old were Lewis and Clark when they died?
How old were they when they died? Well, when they started the expedition, Lewis was 29 and Clark was 33, and actually about 31. He was about to turn there, and Clark lived on to he lived to be, I think, 63, but Lewis died when he was 34 years of age. 34. He was 35. I guess he just turned 35. Someone else? Yes, young lady in the blue.
When was Sacagawea born?
When was she born? Well, that was the same question that was asked there a moment ago, and it's hard to say definitively. We don't know absolutely, but she was probably born around probably 1788, something like that. Late 1780s.
We got an internet question.
We have an internet question?
Yeah, about Crazy Horse.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it chief or a political leader?
Oh, very good question. And maybe Elsie or even maybe Raymond could speak to that. the question was Crazy Horse, because Crazy Horse is a very important American. And I want to reiterate for our students and teachers out there that when we talk about men like Red Cloud, or men and women, Sacagawea, Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, or Black Buffalo, or any of these important Native Americans who played a part in this story of Lewis and Clark and other things. These are names that you need to know. You need to know these names just like you know the name of Martin Luther King, or John F. Kennedy, or Ronald Reagan, or the presidents of the United States. These are important Americans who are part of our story, and we all need to know. But the question was about Crazy Horse. Can you tell us, was Crazy Horse, and the question was Crazy Horse a chief or a political leader? And is there a distinction there?
He could be a political leader because they said he was never a chief, but he was going to be appointed one head of the 4 reservations. He was supposed to be the chief of the 4 reservations, but he wasn't really appointed at the time when he died.
So we're talking about being appointed by the government.
Yes.
But he was never.
It's the people that wanted him to be their chief, but they didn't really appoint him. They were going to do that later, but he died before.
Right. Okay. And that's an important distinction. In fact, our guest Raymond Used the Knife Jr. mentioned to us earlier. You know, we talked about this word chief, and it's important to understand that that's a word that whites used to describe the position that individuals held in the tribe. And it's not always fair or good for us to use those terms, because the structure sometimes of the tribes was not exactly parallel to what the non-native world understood in the structure of their governments. In fact, Raymond, could you speak to that a little bit about the leadership with regard to what has often been referred to as chiefs, but even among the different tribes, I mean, there were different ways of electing leaders, weren't there?
The way the Nachals were selected were, of course, ceremoniously. However, they had to show a lot of high esteem and stature among the nation, and also be considered leaders of their own peers. Because to be a leader of your nation, you have to first give of all of your self and your selflessly is what I'm trying to say. And Trashunke Witko is who we call Crazy Horse. Today,
Can you say that one more time?
Trashunke Witko.
Tashunte Witko.
Yes.
It'd be good for all the teachers out there to have their students repeat these words when they hear them.
Also remember the difference between the dog and the horse. The dog is Trashunka, and the horse is Shunke. So Trashunke Witko is Crazy Horse.
And the horse was really a really big dog. Right?
Yes, yes. Also, the Shunke Wakan is what we call the horse, and is very also played a big part in our spirituality, because the horse was considered holy, sacred amongst our people because of the ability and the agility of the animal to protect our way of life. Yeah.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you very much, Pilama. So I'll tell you, we've got a great topic today. We've had a great conversation. Unfortunately, time dictates that we're going to have to wrap up today's broadcast of Live with Lewis. And again, we're coming to you from the Cheyenne River Indian Reservations and the Titwan, the Cheyenne River. But let's say let's have all of our students today say Titwan Oate. Can everybody out here say that?
Titwan Oyate.
Tituan Oyate. If you can't say it, we're not going to get the kids in New York to be able to say it. Okay, we've got to get you guys with that language helping us out so we can learn it ourselves as we move across the country. We want to thank everybody for joining us. Continue to send your messages to us at Lewis and Clark at clayton.k12.mo.us. I'd like to thank Grandma Elsie. Thank you very much for being here today. Elsie Slides Off, oral historian for the tribe and elder of the tribe. Thank you again. We appreciate it so much, you being here. Thank you very much. And we want to say Kulama, and how do we say goodbye?
Doksha Ake.
Doksha Ake. And until we see you again, we're proceeding on. Thank you. Doksha Ase.